When you are starting out, what are the best settings for daytime street photography? Let's get into it. Unfortunately for me, night street photography takes a dip during the springtime and the summertime, and that's because here in the UK we have this dastardly daylight saving time where they put the clocks forward and it doesn't get dark until 9:30 in the summertime, thus ruining my chances for a long evening session of street photography. Perhaps I should move to New Zealand in the summertime, or Argentina, or Chile, or even Antarctica. Think of the street photography possibilities. However, the good news is there's still daytime street photography that will keep me going way into the evening. So in this exploration, we're going to look at every setting you need to know to conquer your camera setting for daytime street photography. Let's jump straight in. So aperture is basically the camera lens's pupil. It controls how much light enters the lens. The aperture opens to let in more light or closes down to restrict it. And this affects how much of your scene is in sharp focus. And picture depth of field as a plane of focus extending through your image. A wide aperture such as f2.8 creates a shallow depth of field, isolating your subject against a beautifully blurred background, and that's perfect for directing the viewer's attention onto the subject. On the flip side, a narrow aperture such as f11 or f16 extends that plane of focus, rendering more of your scene sharp from foreground to background. And that's ideal for landscape photography where you want to capture every single detail. The optimal aperture for street photography is generally considered to be f5.6 to f8. This is because it strikes a balance between a moderate depth of field where you can still capture elements of the background to show off the environment in your image, whilst also giving the subject enough separation from the background. The f5.6 to f8 aperture range is also considered to be the best aperture range for street photography because lenses tend to be at their sharpest when stopped down a few stops from their widest aperture, and this range often falls within that sweet spot. However, I personally do not worry too much about sharpness, and that is because, number one, I only ever share my photos on my website or social media, so there isn't any room for any kind of pixel peeping like there would be if I was printing my photos. And number two, most importantly, I think the story of the image is more important than how sharp the image is. Therefore, for these reasons, and also because I like a softer vibe to my photos, I generally shoot at an aperture of f3.2 to f4 during the daytime. The cameras that I use for street photography, the Ricoh GR3 and the GR3X, even at the widest aperture of f2.8, don't offer a super shallow depth of field. That's because they have wider lenses, 28mm and 40mm equivalent, which inherently have deeper depth of field than longer lenses. Plus, for that creamy background blur, you often need to get closer to your subject, and I personally like to shoot my subjects from a certain distance from them. So what type of aperturist are you? Do you want a bit more depth of field in your images, or do you like getting up close to people? Are you like me and want a softer vibe to your photos and like to remain a certain distance away from your subjects? Think about this and choose your aperture wisely, but don't choose a too narrow aperture, or your camera will be forced to pick a slow shutter speed, and therefore there's a greater chance of your subject being blurred. Just a quick one, if you're getting something out of this video, then please hit that like button and please subscribe for more tutorials and other explorations. I really appreciate it. Because I shoot at wide apertures even during the daytime using Aperture Priority, I'm happy if the camera picks a fast shutter speed to work in tandem with the wide aperture. which is why I use auto ISO with a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th of a second during the daytime. And you can try this as well, because once you've mastered auto ISO with minimum shutter speed, believe me, there ain't no going back, baby. Shutter speed is the amount of time that the camera's shutters stay open, exposing the sensor to light. Thus, the longer that they stay open, the more time there is for light to hit the sensor. Now, slower shutter speeds are like letting the world paint itself on your camera sensor. With the shutter open for a second or more, anything moving within that scene will create a beautiful blur, like a brush stroke across the frame. It's a great way to capture the essence of motion and add some artistic flair to your shots. Just keep in mind that when using a slow shutter speed of approximately 1 second during the daytime, your lens will probably require an ND filter, as at even a very narrow aperture of f/16, a 1 second exposure will still probably be too bright and will cause your image to be overexposed. Fast shutter speeds are like hitting the pause button on the world. The shutter opens and closes in a flash. This brief moment is too quick for letting any significant movement to be recorded, so therefore everything's frozen in place. It's like taking a snapshot of a single instant, capturing the scene as a still, sharp image. When you're out shooting in the daytime, there are many environmental factors to consider, such as sunny weather, cloudy weather, and also raining weather. And if you live in the UK, you can get all three within the space of a couple of hours. Not only the weather is a factor, when you're shooting on the streets, you inevitably do a lot of walking, and you may walk into darker, potentially covered areas, and also built up areas where there's potentially a lot of shadows. This is why I always choose a range for my ISO using auto ISO in the daytime and in the nighttime. And during the day, I will happily choose a range from 100 to 3200. And with a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th of a second, you can capture a fairly fast moving subject. But if you're particularly into photographing cars or dogs running on the beach, then by all means pick a faster shutter speed. For daytime street photography, in Aperture Priority, let Auto ISO do the heavy lifting. Set your aperture to something like f3.2 or f5.6, whatever you'd like, and using Auto ISO, pick a base ISO of 100. Then choose a minimum shutter speed of 1/250th of a second to freeze any action. If the camera thinks the shot will be underexposed at those settings, it'll automatically bump up the ISO to brighten things up, but only up to the maximum ISO of 3200 that you've set. This way you can focus on composing your shots while the camera takes care of the exposure, keeping your shutter speed fast enough to avoid blur. Just keep in mind that when you're using auto ISO with minimum shutter speed in Aperture Priority mode, your camera has your back up to a point. If you wander into a really dark scene and the ISO hits the maximum value that you've set, in this case it's 3200, but there's still not enough light, your camera will start slowing down the shutter speed to compensate, even if it means going below your minimum shutter speed. It's like your camera saying, I've done all I can with the ISO, but we still need more light, so I'm gonna have to compromise the shutter speed. But here's the thing, if you have a steady hand, you might be able to get away with slower shutter speeds than what you think. With my Ricoh GR3 and my GR3X, I know I can shoot as slow as 1/30th of a second and still get sharp shots. So it's worth experimenting to find your own slowest shutter speed before you start seeing blur creeping into your photos. Camera technology these days have come to a point where autofocus systems can reliably and accurately focus on subjects. And when it comes to street photography, there are two focusing modes that I use, which I think are great for starting out: single shot autofocus or continuous autofocus. Single autofocus is best for stationary subjects, as it locks focus when the shutter button is pressed halfway and maintains that focus until the shot is taken. I use a version of it on my Ricoh GR3 and GR3X 100% of the time, even with moving subjects, and it works for me. Obviously, results may differ depending upon the camera brand. Continuous autofocus, on the other hand, which I've used on my A7R3, is ideal for moving subjects. In this mode, and what you're seeing here is the continuous autofocus on the Ricoh GR3, the camera continually adjusts focus as long as the shutter button is pressed halfway. These shots were all photographed in horrible light conditions using continuous autofocus with my Sony A7R3 using either medium flexible spot or expand flexible spot, which is one of the many Sony focus area options that helps nail focus. Additionally, when using continuous autofocus, the camera will change the autofocus point depending upon where you point the camera while pressing the shutter button halfway. This allows for more flexible and dynamic focusing, which is particularly useful in street photography. There are also other focusing methods that you can test out, such as zone focusing and manual focusing, and even tracking autofocus. I just wanted to show you what I use and I think are great for getting started with. On my Ricoh cameras, I always use auto area autofocus in the center mode, which gives me a great hit rate. And the Ricoh GR3 and the GR3X are not known for their snappy focus systems. So I would suggest experimenting with your camera, because on many modern cameras, continuous and tracking autofocus works brilliantly. White balance is like your camera's way of adjusting colours to match the light source. I believe for street photography, using auto white balance is the best choice. It adapts to changing light conditions, ensuring your images maintain a natural look without any weird colour casts. Another important setting to consider is metering mode. This determines how your camera calculates exposure. For street photography, I use evaluative matrix metering mode. In my Ricoh cameras, it's called multi-segment metering mode. This mode takes readings from multiple zones from across the frame, providing a balanced exposure even in complex lighting situations. Aperture Priority is a great mode to use when you're starting out, as it gives you a level of creative control over your aperture, allowing you to experiment to a certain degree. With Aperture Priority, you get to choose the aperture and the ISO, whilst the camera picks the shutter speed. Perhaps you want to capture an interesting subject with a shallow depth of field, or you might want to use a narrow aperture to photograph the subject within their surroundings. I use Aperture Priority pretty much all the time these days, as I can set the aperture, use auto ISO with minimum shutter speed, and then I can just go out and forget about the settings, so I can just focus on capturing subjects and potential stories. When shooting in Aperture Priority mode, you may encounter situations where the camera's metering system doesn't quite nail the exposure. In these cases, you can use exposure compensation to adjust the exposure whilst maintaining your chosen aperture value. By dialing in positive or negative exposure compensation, you can tell the camera to darken or brighten the image as needed. Just be aware that when you dial in the exposure compensation, the camera will adjust the shutter speed accordingly. So keep an eye on your shutter speed to ensure that it doesn't drop too low and cause motion blur. On my Ricoh cameras, I shoot in RAW plus JPEG, so if I want, I can choose to edit any photos that I take, or I can set a JPEG film simulation from my image settings, such as positive film, and use that file without having to mess around editing my photo. So find out what you prefer. Do you like editing, or would you rather have the camera apply colours or a black and white treatment to your photos in body? Just a quick one. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them below. And also, if you like the look of the photos that I've shown you today, I've linked my presets in the description below, which now include the mobile versions as well. In this video, we've explored the best camera settings for daytime street photography. Use Aperture Priority for some creative control and ease of use. Most street photographers prefer shooting from f5.6 to f8, but it's cool to experiment and find what works for you. Using auto ISO up to 3200 with a minimum shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. In Aperture Priority mode, let your camera adjust the exposure for you, whilst keeping things blur free. Plus, when you're starting out, I think using autofocus is the way to go. Just let the camera do it for you. Ultimately, I believe that these settings strike a balance of creative control and convenience for your street photography, allowing you to focus on capturing compelling subjects and stories on the streets. However, if you want to learn how Lightroom presets can transform your street photography game, then check out this video here. Until we meet again, go forth and create.